Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Warcraft news. Quite a fun show today because, well, Shadowlands has a release date. I think that's pretty exciting. We've also got a pretty major lore tease from Blizzard and a bunch of other things, like the Helm of Domination has apparently been fixed, so that's kind of major. We've got class changes that have been continuing as well, the easing of transmog restrictions, and a whole bunch of other things, like Blizzard have got a pair of new World of Warcraft lore books on the way, which I think is going to be something that's going to be pretty impactful to our understanding of things. So that's what's going on, plus a bunch of other things. Also, there's 2 days left in August, and of course it's Monk Month and Patreon, so if you want to get the Monk class pin, the sticker, the art, including the lovely bookmark, then now's the time. Patrons, thank you, and with that said, let's get stuck into the video. Well, we finally have it, the release date of Shadowlands, and also the schedule for Shadowlands 2. So, Shadowlands comes out on the 26th/27th of October, and that's just because, you know, usual midnight release stuff. Believe officially it is the 27th in the US. So yeah, there we go. That's when Shadowlands is coming out. Basically, it's coming out in 2 months from essentially, well, it's the 28th now, so, or 27th. Yeah, basically, right? No, 29th? Whatever. 2 months from today's video, basically, we'll be playing Shadowlands. I think that's pretty cool. So there's the first bit. The second bit, though, is the Castle Nathria and season opening stuff. So Castle Nathria, normal and heroic, and then Shadowlands Season 1 for, of course, Mythic Plus and PvP. That opens on the 10th of November. So basically a fortnight after the expansion launches. Then November 17th is Mythic, of course, Mythic Raid and Raid Finder Wing 1. Then December 1st is Raid Finder 2. December 15th is Raid Finder 3. January 5th is Raid Finder 4. And after that, who the hell knows what's going to happen? I guess patch 9.1? So that's kind of exciting. So then the next thing to think about is pre-patch. I think pretty obvious, maybe week 3, week 4 of September is when we can expect that. And overall, yeah, I mean, that's basically our path to the finish. Now, are there some concerns still left? I mean, yes, I think absolutely. For me, like one of the things I was doing recently, I was looking at the Covenant abilities for the classes that I want to play and seeing how they've developed. And I'll tell you what, Night Fae, it's one of my favorite Covenants visually and aesthetically and all that. But man, when it comes down to the abilities, the Night Fae are really struggling for a few classes. And I think it's not a min-maxing thing. I want to be super clear about that. It is not min-maxing. It is about, like, you know, fantasy and, like, just how much fun something is to use, and that is just struggling a bit. So I'm still concerned about that. And then the other thing is the Maw. I mean, we were kind of impressed with it initially because we saw these sort of Dark Souls-like inspirations, and, you know, it seemed like it would be the sort of Timeless Isles area that was really, really dangerous, and I thought that could have been quite exciting. But the thing is, when I made that original video on the Maw, I kind of expected that, you know, development would have continued for it. And as it stands, the Maw is just this weird question mark place. We're not particularly sure how it's really going to be fitting into your overall gameplay. Now, there still is, 2 months to go until launch. But yeah, I'm still a little bit concerned about the Maw and where that actually slots in and whether it's going to be that worth it as a thing. But other than those two things, yeah, a bunch of Shadowlands is shaping up in a way that I think is a bit better than BFA, which certainly is an exciting thing. So that's that one bit of news. But next up, we've got a real juicy bit of lore to get into. So it looks like Garrosh is returning to the game. That's a bit wild, but this is from Afterlives. It's not from the Afterlives episode that, of course, we covered on the channel yesterday. It is from the teaser that Blizzard posted. And yeah, look at this image. I mean, that looks like Garrosh. Also, this is the bit that's a bit more, I think, relevant. This is mirroring the War Crimes front cover, right? The novel War Crimes. It's got Garrosh up in the chains in the exact same pose as what we see in this shot. And if you think about all of the places that Garrosh would have been sent to, I mean, it's obviously the Venthyr because he was an arrogant prick, right? That's basically what was up with Garrosh. He was full of pride, and that's what they try to strip away from you in over in Venthyr land. So yeah, I think him going to Revendreth makes complete sense, given his sort of, you know, sin of pride. That's a bit weird though, because we've not seen him on you know, in the game at all, right? I don't think we've even heard any tell of him at all. So that, I think, likely means that either we're just going to get to see what happened to Garrosh when he went to Revendreth, maybe he was processed by Revendreth and ended up somewhere else, or perhaps he's going to return in Revendreth in some sort of future patch. Now, there is another thing. Garrosh didn't die in Azeroth. he died on AU Draenor, right? In the Warlords of Draenor expansion. But he still went to the regular Shadowlands, and that does further show us that AU Draenor was kind of like this pocket dimension that was sort of thrust into existence by the meddling of, of Kairos and co. But they really, like, it's not just this infinite timeline thing. It's like it was one that was just sort of spawned out and now it exists, but it still has the same Burning Legion. It still has like the same Shadowlands, all of that stuff. I think it's just a bit more confirmation. And it does mean that everybody who died on AU Draenor, including anybody who say died in Urel's conquests, they will have ended up, of course, in the Shadowlands, and I'm pretty sure that's something Blizzard would want to play with should they ever decide to bring Urel back, which I do think they will. Now, moving on past that, there was also just a bunch of like hype shots, seeing the Winter Queen's eyes sort of glow and look powerful. It was also nice to see Draka, of course, the mother of Thrall. She, just going about Maldraxxus, kind of doing the Maldraxxus thing, which is indeed to vie for power, and she'll be a decently major character in Maldraxxus, and certainly I'm kind of excited to see what the Maldraxxus Afterlives brings us, because if Drak is going to be a primary character, then it does suggest to us that she's going to be decently important in the expansion. Now, that is something that I think is super interesting, because Thrall also does go into the Shadowlands with us, right? So does that mean that Thrall could like meet his mother? Are we going to see a little bit of that be explored in terms of the possibilities with Afterlives? I'd imagine so, and I think that's actually, pretty exciting. At the very least, we get a fun thing to talk about every week for the next while, and that's pretty exciting. So there's some lore, let's move on. And I suppose we'll move on to yet another bit of lore, and this is a pretty simple one. The Helm of Domination, Arthas' helm, Bolvar's helm, that of course Sylvanas ripped in two, has been datamined in a repaired form. What the hell does this mean? Well, I think it's pretty interesting because it really opens up the possibility of somebody else putting the helm back on again. It does echo that whole "there must always be a Lich King" line. Now, I think that is an interesting thing, because what did we see in, of course, yesterday's video when we covered the Afterlives short? Well, we saw that Arthas was described as an agent of the Maw. Now, if he's an agent of the Maw going around with his Frostmourne and his helm, and the jailer can maybe influence him or something like that, which really seems to be what Blizzard is trying to suggest here, then if Bolvar puts that helm on, and Bolvar's resisting that like weird other voice, which it turns out is the jailer within the helm, then that's kind of like Bolvar putting the helm on, which, that helm is supposed to be like the jailer's way of expressing his influence, right, in the mortal realm. But if Bolvar puts that helm on and then resists him, well, that's a bit rubbish for the jailer. He no longer gets the thing that he wants. So whenever Sylvanas comes up and says, that you're like calls Bolvar a usurper, that I think could be tying back to Bolvar kind of, usurping the role of the Lich King and kind of denying the jailer his power in Azeroth for a little while, which is maybe why he then had to rely on Sylvanas to do his dirty work. And of course, Muzala and a bunch of others. Maybe we're going to reform that. We're going to realize we do need a Lich King to actually sort of hold the jailer's, stuff back in Azeroth, and maybe we, put the helm back on somebody. It would be very funny if we then, redeemed Arthas and plopped the helm on him. I don't think they're going to do that, but there certainly has been a lot of talk about an Arthas redemption. I'm very mixed in that idea. There are pros, yes, there's also cons, so I'm pretty iffy in that. But, there you go. The helm has been repaired. Also, it does make you think who repaired it. I would say probably the guy who made it, which is the Rune Carver, who's a character that we do deal with as we, go about Torghast and make our legendaries. Certainly, if you're into Wrath of the Lich King, there's going to be a lot of lore reveals. Now, whether those are good or bad, it kind of depends on your perspective, but I think there's going to be a lot. And next up, it is no longer time to watch your clever mouth, bitch, because that line's been changed. And if that came out of nowhere, then yes, watch your clever mouth, bitch is a line in the Cataclysm expansion where basically Garrosh appears. He appears in the Silver Pine campaign when you're going about with Sylvanas doing generally pretty disagreeable things, I would say. And Sylvanas kind of flexes on Garrosh, being all like, hey, look, I've got these Valkyr, they've risen up these people, wonderful. And, to Garrosh, this is a big abomination of nature. It's not the done thing. We shouldn't be doing things like this. And, that's the line that he says. Now, that is something that Blizzard have now changed. Now Garrosh says, watch your clever mouth, and I believe the voice acting is, sort of, it's either gone or changed. I think it's gone. Now Garrosh no longer says that. Of course, this was a change to a thing that was in the game for 10 years, so yes, it has certainly sparked discussion. What I would say here is, we are having people getting offended over a word when, you know, the actual storyline of the game has got things like Sylvanas' genocide that is kind of justified by in-game lore. We've got the forced breeding backstory of Alexstrasza and Sinestra, but, you know, a bad word is like, that's the thing? I don't know. In my experience, people, and I don't mean this as like a pejorative against people in the USA, but I have sort of experienced that people in the USA do get a bit more offended over swear words in general, as I think, as opposed to a lot of the Euros and sort of, you know, Brits and Irish and stuff. I mean, hey, that's basically the way Preach's entire YouTube channel's been demonetized. Turns out the people from our neck of the woods and the Aussies, you know, we're all pretty okay with the C word, but ho boy, if that gets at an American platform, you are going to get slapped down. So, I don't know. It's a bit weird. Now, Stephen User did offer an explanation over on Twitter where he basically said they felt like they gained more from removing the line than they did from keeping it. Okay, now the reasoning here is that basically, well, he says the reasoning is that real people want to make the game, you know, a little better for future generations. And this whole thing was inspired by a team member playing the game with their kid and thinking that the language stuck out. Now, to be honest, I thought that the kind of point was that it did stick out because swearing, which usually is never went harder than words like bitch or bastard, you know, that's very, very sparing in the Warcraft universe, which I think has always meant that they've been able to have mild language, which does fall within a, you know, a 12 plus rating, but they've still been able to have that mild language have a pretty decent impact whenever it is used, and it is used sparingly. So yeah, I always thought that was kind of the point, that it did stick out a little bit because it was like such an unholy, disagreeable thing to a regular person that Sylvanas was doing in Silverpine. But I don't know. I mean, WoW is a 12 plus game, right? That does mean mild language. Its storylines aren't 12 plus, so I mean, if we're getting offended over a word like this, you know, like there's a lot of cartoons that are maybe designed for sort of that age group, and, you know, for maybe the kids, like, you know, the sort of the kid of the parent who is in the WoW team, who's kind of the person who brought it up internally that led this to happen, where, you know, if they were watching their Cartoon Network show and it had a sort of justified genocide and forced breeding in it, then, I mean, I don't know. Where are we with the Warcraft universe? Do we kind of have these like extremely hardcore storylines sort of on one side of things, but then we kind of have to sort of sanitize it and stuff on the other? That's a bit weird to me. I mean, it's also a word that like Sylvanas herself has said, right? She says, give my regards to hell, you son of a bitch, in Warcraft 3. So she says that, and I don't know. I mean, coming from the creators of the very modern, nihilistic sort of edgy side of the modern WoW lore, I just think it's a bit funky, but also I think it's probably a bit different from their perspective. Nonetheless, I'm glad that Steve at least stepped out and explained why they did what they did. I think for opinions, well, you'll just have to leave them down below or on Twitter or whatever. That's kind of really all we can talk about with that, I'd say. Next up, though, we do have more good news, actually. So, there's two books. One of them is called World of Warcraft Folk and Fairy Tales of Azeroth. Now, you might be thinking, oh, that's kind of small. But if you think about, you know, a lot of like lore and history and stuff, a lot of that's sort of codified in like, you know, the oral tradition of like, you know, fairy tales and things. So I actually think that this book coming out in April 4th, 2021, I think it could really give us just some interesting little nods, even if it's just like various cultures' perspectives on the lore. I think there's a lot we'll be able to read into that, because certainly think about what Azeroth is and what Elune is, you know, looking at Musha and all the Tauren lore and their stories, that's been really interesting. So if this book gives us more of that, then yeah, I'm extremely excited. Now there is another book, and it's called World of Warcraft, Grimoire of the Shadowlands and Beyond, to which I say, and beyond, you say? Because yes, it's the Shadowlands and beyond, which to me makes it seem like this is the chronicle of the Shadowlands, right? It's a lore book. It's by, I think, Sean Copeland, who is a Blizzard historian, is basically, I think he just does a lot of lore work within the company. And yeah, that comes out July 14th, 2021. Now, I'm then thinking, like, if Shadowlands is like BFA, then July 14th would be around the same time as, you know, equivalent-wise, patch 8.2. And if it was like Legion, it would be probably around the same time as like patch 8.3 testing, so it would be coming out just before, I'd say, a major patch. And then I have to think, does that mean that wherever we're going in the Shadowlands patches, Blizzard will want to tie in some sort of big chronicle-like lore book that will establish a whole bunch of things? Potentially, and certainly I remember how exciting it was the days of Chronicle coming out, so that we've got these 2 books in the way, to me, is just, dead hype. I can't wait to see what they do. There's just so many lingering questions because, like, Chronicle was written in an era that we've kind of moved a little bit onwards from, I think, and just seeing what little things they say, I think it's going to be extremely instructive for future lore speculation. Then next up, we've got a great change for Transmogrification, where all Legion artifact appearances are now available within their own weapon categories. That might seem a little complex, but Blizz's example actually makes it pretty clear. So Doomhammer is now just a one-handed mace that you find just under the one-handed mace category. Now, it will still exist in like the artifact category of like the weapons drop down, but the fact that it's available as its own like individual weapon does mean that it's then freed up from a whole bunch of specific restrictions. So yes, you can use, your existing pairs of weapons from that drop-down menu, like say, sets of war glaives, but now you can mix and match them. So you could have one glaive of one color, another of another color. You could dual wield doom hammers because the game just treats the doom hammer like a one-handed mace. So that's going to like just allow you to do so much more when it comes to building up transmogs around what you've unlocked in Legion. Then speaking of Legion, well, Ian Hazzikostas actually responded to player concerns about it being harder to solo Legion content in PTR than it is on Live. And he basically said that all older content soloing should be as doable as it is right now. And basically, if it's not the case in the PTR, then tweaks are made. So that's fine. Now, there is one concern that I would like to flag up here that Ian has not addressed, and that is that a lot of players are concerned about the gold value, the raw gold value of running old raids actually decreasing with the Shadowlands squish. And that does mean that running old raids to vendor things is going to be a less lucrative activity in terms of gold per hour. At least it's looking that way right now. Now, of course, that type of gold making is also a source of inflation, so maybe Blizzard just don't want that to happen too much. But at any rate, that's something that is happening, and certainly there's a lot of people a bit worried because that would have been one of the ways that they would have relaxed, got some transmogs, and also made a bit of coin. Then next, class changes. We're going to roll through them real quick, and you know what? It's kind of nice to see this degree of stuff happening, even though it's pretty late in the day. So, for the monks, I've got some good news. Each one of your celestial cooldowns now has a new effect. So, Nu Zhao's stomp damage is increased by 25% of the stagger you've purified in the last 5 seconds. Over for Windwalkers then, Xuan does lightning damage every 8 seconds, and he deals 10% of the damage that you've dealt within the last 8 seconds, so it kind of scales with what you're doing. Then for Yulon, well, there's a bit more going on. So Yulon casts a Soothing Breath on an injured target, which heals them and up to 4 nearby allies. Now, this works like Soothing Mist, so it will get all of the relevant bonuses to that. There's also Chi-Ji, who will cause your physical attacks to heal enemies and reduce the cast time of your next Enveloping Mist, to the point where I believe it can be instant as well. And also, when you use it, you're freed from like roots and stuff. But then, the final rank of Yulon causes Yulon and Chi-Ji to heal up to 5 nearby targets when you cast Enveloping Mist, which then heals allies over 6 seconds and will increase the healing received from you by 10%. So basically, right, Blizzard are just trying to make those a little bit more interactive, a little bit more exciting, and I think that's a good thing. That's definitely a criticism that I had of the way that they were. Now that said, I did play a Windwalker Monk as a main for the first few patches of BFA, and just between the bugs and the way that they keep on trying to advance the design of that spec by giving us more chi via abilities, and they continue to do it in Shadowlands, when actually that's like an anti-design pattern with our mastery and kind of causes a bunch of issues. So I don't know. I'm still not going to play a monk, unfortunately, I think, but I do think that these are pretty good changes. And aside from that, Blizzard have also said that they are working on bugs, which is good. That would need to happen. Okay, next up for the Shadow Priests, of course, they've been redesigned, but they've now got a new mastery that increases the damage taken by a target for each dot that's up on the target. So that's a nice little synergy, but also, if you're then in Void form, then the mastery just has its maximum effect on all targets, regardless of dots. So that kind of reinforces your dotting gameplay as a Shadow Priest, but it also gives Void form a kind of like pretty cool direct damage boost. So seems decent enough to me so far. Then for the balanced druids, well, I think good news for you guys, because Shooting Stars is now baseline and a passive is going to take its place in the talent tree. I think there's going to be a lot of happiness over that. But then also, I think a really good change is Star Surge is now a bit different. So it no longer extends Eclipse. Instead, what it does is it increases the Eclipse damage bonus. So the gameplay now is going to be pulling your astral power into getting a bunch, so you can do a bunch of star surges, so you can then like pump up your Eclipse's damage bonus decently early on and then get a bunch of benefit from it. Now, this is something that I think is quite good. I like that pooling gameplay. It also does solve, Blizzard say, an issue with how the spec would be scaling with haste over time. So that does seem pretty good to me, actually. I will say I'm still not particularly thrilled with the new design of the Eclipses, but aside from that, does seem decent enough. Then next up, moving on to another spec, Rat Paladin. So you've got your old school execution sentence back. So yeah, that big hammer that drops slowly from the sky with its 1 minute cooldown, you've got that now. And Inquisition is being replaced by Final Reckoning, which is a targeted AoE that causes enemies hit to take 50% increased damage from your holy power abilities for 8 seconds. 50! That's pretty chunky. So yeah, it seems pretty cool. And then when it's on cooldown, any of your attacks have actually got this chance to just call a light bolt that will just do holy damage to a target and increase the damage they take from your next holy power ability by 10%. So it seems pretty cool. Certainly, what would it be like, comboing these, right? Getting your big execution sentence final tick to be 50% more? I don't know. But yeah, I mean, in AoE situations, it seems pretty strong. And in single target, I mean, 50% more from your holy power spenders. That seems kind of insane. So I would say seems like a pretty cool talent. That said, it's not a spec that I main, so other people will probably know a bit more. Then a change from, for multiple classes. Mortal Wounds, so that applies to anybody who applies Mortal Wounds as a part of their class. The healing reduction has been doubled against non-players, which basically means that effects like that are going to have more utility in a PvE context, which is great because they previously didn't really... I mean, they did work, of course, but they just weren't super noticeable. And the same actually goes for rogues and warlocks with their similar abilities abilities and poisons in the case of the rogues. So that's pretty cool. The next up, Elemental Shamans. You're getting Maelstrom back. Fulmination is something that they tried to replace Maelstrom with. They removed the Maelstrom bar pretty early on in BFA, or not BFA, what am I talking about, in Shadowlands, but they've now decided that basically, as they balance Fulmination more and more, it just ended up feeling like Maelstrom again, but with a worse UI. So Blizzard have decided to undo those changes. So we'll have to see how it all shakes out when it gets into the gameplay, but I will say, sure, if it's not working, fair enough, and I guess big respect to Blizzard for being willing to shift things around that are not working so late in the day, rather than just being like, well, we're kind of stuck with it now, so there you go, enjoy this for the next 2 years, which is something they've been guilty of in the past, so I think a good move there. And then finally, there was some iteration on the specifics of Unholy DK, which is mostly just based on the changes we mentioned in last week's video. Okay, that was a lot. Overall, here's my opinion, right? It's great to see this level of iteration happen, especially at a stage where we're getting later into the beta, we're getting to the stage where Blizzard will want to be getting themselves to having a release candidate soon, and they're still there doing those class changes. Now, I'm saying that's a really good thing because in the past, there have just been glaring class flaws that have existed sort of long into expansions. And no doubt some of that is going to happen. There are loads of issues that do exist, and I do expect that many of them will not be fixed in time for launch. But seemingly, they're a bit more willing to do a bit more change a bit later in the day than in the past, and that certainly is a good sign. Again, though, I think for me, it's just going to take a long time of going into depth with every single class and every single spec and every single conduit and every single soulbind and every single covenant ability because there's a lot of layered systems in this expansion. And of course, the legendaries. There are so many layered systems that it's going to be a lot to dive into. But anyway, that is it for today's edition of the WoW News. We've got new books coming, really exciting new lore. If you want to dive into the Lich King Arthas stuff from Afterlives that we did yesterday, you can check that out. If you want to get some sweet Patreon loot, there's that as well. And with that said, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.